Hi, Kate here with another video, and I hope everyone is doing well. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Also, provide a link to it. Last week, or over about 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by a really interesting podcast, YouTube channel, What's Left? What's Left question mark. I was interviewed on the presidential campaign of Emmanuel Pasternak, and I provided a link to it. It's on my Rumble channel as well as on the What's Left podcast channel. We talked about stuff which is not YouTube friendly. YouTube censors won't like it too much, so I didn't put it on my channel, but it's on the What's Left channel, and I provide a link to it. It's on my Rumble channel as well. Hope you enjoy. Okay, this video is on suppression of pro-Palestinian activists and pro-Palestinian speeches, crackdown on the freedom of speech. As I'm doing this is September 24th, I believe. And as I'm making this, I'll probably upload it a few days from now. But the genocide in Gaza is continuing. It's a horrific, heartbreaking tragedy. It's literally genocide. You'll often hear death toll of 40,000 people. It was kind of frozen for the last maybe 5 or 6 months. It's going on a year. It's close to a year this has been happening since October 6th of last year, of 2023. It's still happening. I'm going on a year. The death toll has been frozen at 40,000. I'm going to consult my notes here. Back in May, Ralph Nader estimated there was probably closer to 200,000. He gave some reasons why he thought the death toll was closer to 200,000. Various estimates based on previous situations like this, previous genocides. And said that for various reasons, the various factions involved had an interest in lowballing the amount he thinks is close to 200,000. Back in July, The Lancet, which is a prestigious British medical journal, estimated it was 186,000, close to 200,000. And more recently, I think back in sometime in August, I came across a reference of 340,000, estimated 340,000. Don't quote me on this. I don't remember where I got it from, and I can't find it. We'll just say my hunch is probably around 200,000, which is about 10% of the people of Gaza. It's dictionary definition of genocide. It's slow motion genocide, but it is genocide. It's going on and on. What Israel is doing is not geared towards fighting Hamas or Hezbollah or any other groups, to actually exterminating the people of Gaza. That's exactly what we're seeing. Okay, and there's a protest movement, and I'll talk about then the suppression. Now, the suppression, the crackdown free speech, it goes back a ways, and that's a whole other issue. I made a video on media control last year sometime, the manufacture of consent. Noam Chomsky, a lot of other people have talked about that. U.S. corporate media is very tightly controlled on message, and even much of indie media is also controlled. This goes back a few directions, few ways. The Russiagate hysteria starting around 2016, blaming. I don't support Trump, but Russia had nothing to do with it. But there was a Russia, like hysteria that blaming Russia for getting Trump elected. And I think it was a very destructive role in U.S. politics. Anybody to the left of the Democratic Party was a Russian bot. Jill Stein was a Russian asset. It was like liberal McCarthyism is extremely insidious. And connected to that was a campaign against so-called fake news or any independent media. And this has real-world ramifications, very insidious. That's kind of the backdrop. Like the early days of the internet was like the Wild West in the 90s and early 2000s. If you're old enough to remember, it was almost like the Wild West. Now it's been corporatized. Wikipedia, Google, Facebook control big chunks of it. And there's still some great stuff online, but you got to work a little bit to find it. Okay, Google is a huge behemoth. Their search engine dominates everything. And they've always had algorithm manipulation of it since they existed. But there's a specific program starting in 2017. I actually don't know the name of it, but specific program where they announced they were blocking or delisting anyway what they regard as bad websites. Now, they didn't define what they meant by this bad information, wrong information. They didn't define what they meant. They were just delisting what they regard as low-quality websites and a specific program. And the World Socialist website mentioned this. I'm not, I've mixed feelings about the World Socialist website. disagree with their politics in a lot of ways. They've gone downhill in recent years. They used to be okay. Some major disagreements with them, but they were kind of a news aggregator. I'd read it, fairly often. It was like a socialist take on the news. I don't agree with everything they say, but now they're kind of like CNN, left CNN. I call them. They've gone downhill, but okay. Anyway, they've noticed that an article on this. They had a 70% reduction in their monthly views. It cut off their traffic by 70%. People saw their website, and it came out in 2020 that the president of Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, announced they were specifically censoring the World Socialist website, very specifically. So it's it's pretty insidious. That was one direction this was coming from. Okay, Alex Jones, another figure. We're talking. Alex Jones in 2018. Now, I'm not a huge Alex Jones fan. Alex Jones is Alex Jones. And you could say, yeah, he is kind of unhinged, right-wing conspiracy theory. Sure. I'm not. As I understand, when he first started, he sometimes did have some worthwhile news, some worthwhile information. He did produce some worthwhile content. But, he is Alex Jones. Now, Sandy Hook massacre famous school shooting. Supposedly, he was saying many of the victims or the families were crisis actors, and there are allegations that he was inciting people to harass the family members and the survivors of the Sandy Hook shooting. I'm not going to get into this. Some people defend him. I'm not going to get into this. If he did, it's pretty egregious. I'm not going to defend it. I'm not going to go out of my way to defend Alex Jones. But the point is, 2018 in the court, if that's what he did, there could have been legal remedies, legal redresses. They could have sued him. They could have legally blocked him. Instead, what happened is there was an orchestrated campaign on April, a specific week when Alex Jones, by the way, was huge. He was a huge figure. I mean, he's crazy, yeah, but he's a huge figure. He was taken down, a coordinated attack, taken down everywhere, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the other, just about everywhere. He was made a non-person overnight. And so many people on the left were cheering this on. Now, the left should never support corporate or state censorship. This is going to come back to haunt the left. So, surely YouTube, shortly thereafter, it was like they used taking down Alex Jones as a wedge issue for taking down, like shortly after they got rid of Alex Jones, they started taking down hundreds, maybe thousands of small YouTube channels, which went against their narratives, whatever they were saying. They started attacking a huge number of other channels, taking down really getting super strict about their censorship. So Alex Jones was used as a wedge issue, and so many people on the left were cheering it on. Oh, they've always attacked. No, not like this. So recently, of course, following the news, many Democrats are calling for greater censorship. Hillary Clinton, about a week ago, said that Americans who spread disinformation should be arrested. I mean, Hillary's had a long history of psychotic remarks like that, but this was echoed by AOC. Said this. Disinformation helped get Trump elected, and we need to really fight against this disinformation. And this was echoed by Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, a bunch of other people. So if they get in, they're probably going to ramp up censorship. Now, doesn't mean things are going to be great under Trump either. He's probably the same thing's going to happen under Trump. But just saying what's going on, some of the background in the U.S. Now, in the UK, in 2000, there was the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2000, which superseded earlier anti-terrorism bills. And this called for basically penalties or a ban like was seen as supporting proscribed organizations, which are terrorist organizations. They mention the ISIS, Al Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al Shabaab. Yeah, sure, okay, no one should defend those groups, sure, of course. But it goes on to say or proscribed organizations like the IRA. Now, what is the IRA? There's right now these days there are a zillion different factions. There are a zillion different factions calling themselves the IRA. There are a zillion different factions calling themselves the IRA. What is the IRA? Sinn Féin was a legal political party in both the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, is technically supposed to be the political branch of the IRA, the political wing. The IRA is the armed faction of Sinn Féin, supposedly. I don't know the connection exactly, but so I don't quite understand how this would play out. Also, other proscribed organizations are groups like the PFLP, a Marxist group, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. You can't openly declare your support for the PFLP. The PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, is another group. And interestingly, the U.S. is closely allied with the Syrian branch, Syrian faction of the PKK, very closely connected. In Rojava, all that stuff going on. So what does this mean? It's kind of egregious, and people have been or are prosecuted under the anti-terrorism bill. It was also supplemented by it later as I'll get to that in a minute. So that's some of the background. Okay, so the genocide is still continuing. There were protests, waves of protests in the U.S., U.K., Europe, elsewhere around the world. People rightfully outraged about this. Campus protests kicked off a little, kind of belatedly, a little bit later. First one are the encampments, campus encampments first starting in the U.S. The first one was at Columbia University, which is Lower Manhattan in New York. It's an Ivy League college, very prestigious, very famous, very prestigious, very important ruling class institution. There are many international students there. There have also been waves of activism. It's famous for activism as well. Back in 1967, there were waves of activism against the Vietnam War and against gentrification during the anti-apartheid movements. Starting at Columbia, there were Occupy and BLM movements. There were waves of protests. Columbia's been known for that. So in mid-April of this year, there's an protest encampment, and the authorities did not like this at all. And this spread to it spread to 61 colleges and universities around the U.S. had protest encampments, as far as I know, probably somewhat more. And it spread to the U.K. and Europe and elsewhere. Universities in the U.K. had protest encampments as well, and they were suppressed. There was a wave of hysteria against them. They were blaming anti-Semitism. Biden made a speech, said, yeah, we understand freedom of speech, but there's horrible anti-Semitism, and people in Congress media talked about this. Now, the protests, I have to emphasize, were not anti-Semitic. Seriously, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Many, especially in Columbia and elsewhere, many of the protesters were Jewish. And they made a point of wanting everyone to know they were Jewish, that not all Jewish people support Zionism. They had Shabbat Seders, which is like a Sabbath meal. I'm not Jewish, but as I understand, observant Jews, religious Jews have a Shabbat meal on Friday, and once on Friday, twice on Saturday. So they had these outdoor Shabbat meals. They invited people. They were showing you we're Jewish. We're proud of our heritage. We oppose Israel, what Israel's doing. We're not Zionists. We don't identify with Israel. And the powers that be really hated this. This wrecked their narratives. So there were congressional hearings, high-profile congressional hearings about this, in the presence of several very prominent Ivy League colleges or famous colleges had testified before Congress. So the president of Columbia, Manoush Shafik, I believe she testified separately. She's Egyptian background. Her father was a large landowner who was expropriated under Nasser, the nationalist leader of Egypt. She's a British aristocrat, baroness. According to some accounts, she's in the House of Lords in the UK. I don't know if that's true or not, but she was Chancellor and President of the LSE, London School of Economics. And you read her biography on Wikipedia, she's very well connected to the global elite. And she called the cops on her own students. She was a horrible figure. She called the cops. But anyway, I think she testified separately, but there are several Ivy League presidents. I'm going to refer to my notes here. Get to my notes. So there are Manoush Shafik of Harvard, but also Claudine Gay, who is Manoush Shafik of Columbia. Claudine Gay, who was the president of Harvard, the first woman African American president. She's progressive. She's very progressive in some ways. Claudine Gay, Elizabeth McGill, president of the University of Pennsylvania. Sally Kornbluth, the president of MIT. Martha Pollack, the president of Cornell. Now, there's a big campaign against these. Many major colleges and universities in the U.S. are basically hedge funds or investment funds with teaching as a sideline. They're very closely connected to finance capital, to Wall Street. That's their real main gig. I believe Harvard has something like a multi-billion-dollar endowment. I think it's $3 trillion. Don't quote me on this, but enormous endowment. Second only to the Catholic Church in the U.S. also has a large endowment. They're financial institutions with teaching as a sideline. So anyway, there's a hedge fund guy, Bill Ackman, who's a Zionist, a billionaire hedge fund guy. He had this long campaign against. When presidents testified before Congress, they could have said, whatever you think of the protests, it's your opinion, whatever you think, but they're not anti-Semitic. There's no anti-Semitism here. It's not tolerated, but students have a legitimate right to protest. They could have said that, but they didn't. They have to depend on their billionaire donors, their backers. So they're cringy. Said, we're anti-Semitism is bad, and we need to find some way to stop that. Students still have a right to protest, but we have to, blah, blah, blah. They were trying to have it both ways, and you couldn't do that. So there's a Bill Ackman, a billionaire donor, hedge fund guy. He had this long campaign to push Claudine Gay out, and he succeeded. She was forced to resign. It was ostensibly a plagiarism charge. She might have plagiarized. She's a well-known scholar in some field, plagiarized. Now, academia is an odd caste, and academic politics, internal politics, can be kind of bizarre. And I don't know the whole story. As I understand, plagiarism, like some cases what's considered plagiarism, what she did wouldn't be considered plagiarism in some other cases. Like in any human endeavor, people constantly borrow from each other. The classic case is Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, the famous riff. They got it from a band called Spirit. And people say, they ripped it off, but Spirit in turn, the riff, the classic riff in that song, Spirit got it from some other band, who in turn got it from an old blues musician. So it's hard to say when people borrow stuff all the time, what's plagiarism. And as I understand what happened with Claudine Gay, it was kind of a case like that. I mean, I don't know all the details. The real reason she was pushed out was because of the protests, the anti-genocide protests, the real reason. Also, another president, Martha Pollock, president of Cornell, resigned. Not officially because of the protest, but that's really why they got her. She was a relatively short tenure as well. Liz McGill was forced to, as president of University of Pennsylvania, was forced to resign as well. Sally Kornbluth of MIT survived, as far as I know. Kind of really ironic thing, Bill Ackman, his wife, is an Israeli architect, Nira Oxman, Israeli-American architect. She is a professor at MIT, sometimes teaches there. I don't know a lot about her. I suppose she's some kind of visionary architect. What came out in 2010, her PhD thesis, apparently borrowed from, literally cut and paste from Wikipedia without fully citing sources. And that was weird. And she's part of this lab, which apparently accepted $175,000 from Jeffrey Epstein. So, she didn't have to resign or anything, but it was some egg on the face of this Bill Ackman guy. He was throwing his weight around as a donor, but he's not exactly an angel himself. So, all that was going on. Minouche Shafik was forced to resign in July. It wasn't really a victory for the students. The student protesters at Columbia were huge. They occupied one of the main administrative buildings called Hind Hall after the young 6-year-old girl who was killed. Hind Hall, very moving, very moving. So his presidents were forced to resign or pushed out. It was disturbing for freedom of speech, academic freedom. And there was a crackdown on these protests around the country. Altogether, about 3,000 students were arrested. Protesters at Columbia were arrested. Minouche Shafik called the cops on her own students. It was pretty bad. There was, where are we here? Pomona College in California. 19 students were arrested. The riot police were deployed. There were big protests at UCLA. They brought out riot police on their own students. The cops pushed them out. One instance, the cops really forced them out, closed down the encampment. Then they left, and they rebuilt the encampments. And over about a few days later, they were attacked by Iranians, by Los Angeles. LA has a huge community of pro-monarchist Iranians who I guess came to the U.S. after the 1979 revolution. This is probably second or third generation now. and they were attacked by people said they're speaking Farsi by literally is a huge Iranian popular community called the Tarantulas. They were attacked by apparently a right-wing Iranians, and the cops stood down. They let it happen. They just stood down. And Emory, another incident, Emory University in Georgia, very, very prestigious university. Cops really brutally crushed the protests there. The chair of the philosophy department, an older woman, was arrested. Another woman who was an economics professor, a younger woman, she was pushed to the ground. Literally, cop, really brutal-looking characters, literally pushed her to the ground. It was pretty horrific. By the way, when the chair of the philosophy department was arrested, she called out to a student acquaintance, "Yeah, give my contact, tell so-and-so what happened," so someone on the outside would know what happened to her. I mean, it's pretty horrible. And the professors, probably somewhat of a privileged category, the students were treated even worse in some ways. Really brutal crackdown. And this, of course, has a radicalizing effect on a lot of students. Another big protest was at the more militant protests were at working class colleges. There was a Cal Poly at Humboldt County in Northern California. I haven't been there. I've been to Southern California last year. It was actually snowing in San Diego, which is a little weird. I live in Maine. And snows practically all the time. But anyway, Humboldt County, Northern California, stereotype of a pot growers, marijuana is really big. They kind of stereotype. And this college, Cal Poly, was a working class college, very militant. Protesters took over the administration building, totally took it over, and they pushed the cops out. A great video about this on Twitter. They pushed the cops out. Guy had a water jug and was bopping the cop over the head with it. Cops eventually pushed them out, of course, but it was fun watching this huge. But anyway, very militant. But the cops had a major crackdown. By the way, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, a guy named Bill Kaufman, I don't know a lot about them, a guy named Bill Kaufman runs their Twitter account, and he's a lunatic. He actually said, well, the police should start shooting protesters. He apparently said this. And I don't know if he was ever disciplined by the National Libertarian Party. I don't know a lot about it. So, some of these New Hampshire libertarians are a little bizarre. Okay, anyway, that was going on. So major waves of repression, and academics were fired. Most famous high-profile one, a guy named Danny Shore, relatively young guy in his 30s or 40s, I think. He was a long-time activist. Interesting guy. Danny Shore is a really interesting figure. I've heard interviews with him. He was interviewed by Max Blumenthal and others. He was a heavyweight boxer at one time. He boxed in Madison Square Garden. He said he went through a lumping stage. He was probably a drug dealer. He came from a very tough family background in the Bronx. But anyway, he straightened himself out. He spent a long time in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Knows both places really well. He's connected to revolutionary groups in both places. He's a badass revolutionary. I got that impression. Anyway, he was fired back in April. Some Zionist students were following him, monitoring his tweets, sort of thing, and he was supposed to. He taught at John Jay College of Criminal Law in New York. I've been there. I mean, these told left forum there. Despite it's a College of Criminal Law, despite that, they're actually kind of sort of left wing in some ways. These told have the left forum there every year. It ended in 2019, but I've been there. Anyway, Danny Shore taught there for 18 years. He was fired. And back in, not only that, in April, I believe it was more recently, let me get the date here. Yeah, in August of this year, he was detained by the FBI for several hours. He flew back from London. He was invited speaker at a Palestine film festival in London. He came back to O'Hare airport to Chicago, and the FBI he was detained by the FBI for several hours, grilled about his politics, his political connections, and who he met in London, stuff like that. They're really pretty egregious. It was pretty egregious, and he was grilled for hours on this. There was a major doxing campaign against him. Also, there's a smear campaign against Danny Shore. There's a video clip of him which made the rounds, which made him look anti-Semitic. He's not. Made him look, he said, in the video clip, just a section there, he said, they control the media, they control the government, they control, and it looked like he meant the Jews. That's not what he was saying. The clip was taken totally out. That's not what he was saying. He was saying the capitalists, the ruling class. He wasn't saying the Jews. It made it look like out of context, like he was an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. That's not what he was saying. And he clarified. He clarified on Twitter, saying, "I want to thank all the comrades who had faith in me, who stayed with me, who didn't, buy into these smears. And I want to thank everyone who stayed with me." He strikes me as a really interesting guy. I wanted to interview him about a year ago. I on Twitter, I contacted him on Twitter. Said, it looks like you're doing good work. And I have a small channel. I get it, but he would be an interesting guy to interview sometime. I like the guy. Also, several other people were a scholar named Lisa Hoffman Kuroda, who is a Japanese literature scholar, famous Japanese literature scholar that was fired for being pro-Palestine tweets. I don't know where she was, in California, someplace. 2 University of Arizona educators were suspended. A professor at Washington University in St. Louis was fired October 16th over pro-Palestine views. There are a whole network of Zionists who report on people, dox people, things like that. So a fair number have been fired. Let's see. Outside of academia, some figures, the crackdown on figures pro-Palestinian or people critical of Israel. Scott Ritter, famous figure. He's was an arms control negotiator in Iraq. He got a big run-in with the Clinton administration with Madeleine Albright State Department. They had a big run-in. Anyway, he's a frequent commentator on independent media YouTube channels on Israel and on the Ukraine war. Well, apparently he was interviewed, and this was, I forget the date exactly, forget the time, probably around July or about August, but sometime in August. Judge Napolitano. He has a YouTube channel and media. Judge Napolitano. He's a guy, I like him. Good interviews. He's politically, I think he's a retired judge, actually. He's kind of a conservative libertarian, basically. He interviews a variety of people who are critical of the security state. He's a conservative libertarian, a crusty old conservative, likable guy in his own way. I wouldn't agree with his politics, but anyway, he was on Fox for a while. He has a pretty big following on his YouTube channel. And he interviewed Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter talked about Israeli torture at the Seed Tielman, which is basically a prison or concentration camp in the Negev desert, where stories were coming out that they anally rape prisoners. And he was talking about this very graphically and forcefully, explaining this really well. It's harrowing. And people remarked that 24 hours after he said this, his house was raided by the FBI. We don't absolutely know there's a connection, but there likely is. They didn't give a stated reason. They took all his electronic equipment. They took a lot of stuff which he'll never get back. They took a whole bunch of stuff that's raided by the FBI. So they were very nice about it, very professional. They were nice, but still was pretty good. He wasn't charged with anything. Earlier, they had seized his passport. He was close ties with Russia. Didn't do anything illegal, but trying to make peace between U.S. and Russia, which is desperately needed. And the Biden people were not, Blinken and those people were not too happy when earlier, a few months ago, they seized his passport. He can't leave the U.S. So this is harassment of an anti-war figure. Whether or not you like Scott Ritter, he's being harassed for his anti-war views and his criticism of Israel. That was one big thing. So there's also a proposed bill going on, the so-called anti-Semitism bill. Back, I think it's June or July, I forget when. It's called HR 6090. And basically it's kind of complicated, but it's an amendment to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What it essentially does, HR 6090, it would pass the House of Representatives by 320 votes, 291 against, mostly conservative Republicans in favor, a few kind of by party lines, but a lot of Democrats voted for it too. What it does, it codifies the quote, a group called the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, their definition of what is anti-Semitism. And part of their definition of anti-Semitism, is attacking Jews, but part of their definition of it is denying the Jewish right to self-determination, and could be considered Israel. Any criticism of Israel Israel's right to exist. You can't criticize Israel's right to exist, or comparing Israel to Nazi Germany would be banned. It looks that way, and it's extreme. Now, what this would mean is federal funds going to universities, or like universities and colleges, or could open the way to legal action of universities and colleges if they're seen as violating this. It's a pretty dramatic, pretty chilling effect on freedom of speech. Basically, you can't criticize Israel, legally banning criticizing Israel. And high-profile hearings of this. A couple of people opposed it on civil rights. Representative Jerry Nadler from New York, who's Jewish, but he said, this is a pretty egregious attack on freedom of speech. I oppose this. Matt Gaetz, who's a conservative, populist Republican from Florida, opposed it. A variety of other people opposed it too, on freedom, the civil liberties ground. Republicans and Democrats opposed it, but enough people support it. I don't know if it's going to pass. I don't know. I really don't know if it's going to pass. My guess probably not. But even if it does, it's pretty scary. Could outlaw criticism of Israel. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, was the main proponent of this. I believe he introduced it, but I'm not sure. But he actually was at Columbia, spoke to Columbia in front of all the protests in camp, and they booed him. They roundly booed him and stuff, rightfully. So it's pretty chilling. Only one more. NYU, New York University, they have their new speech code, or anti-discrimination speech code against hate speech. So part of this would essentially declare Zionism to be a protected class. Zionists to be a protected class. Essentially, as far as I understand, would classify Zionism as an anti-Semitic buzzword. You say Zionist, you really mean the Jews in a derogatory sense, which is not true. Again, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Large number of Jewish people are also appalled at what's happening in Gaza. It's not Israel, it's not the Jews, it's Israel, it's the Zionists, and it's very important to make that distinction. But they're trying to blur this distinction as much as possible. And the NYU code is essentially, what I understand, classify Zionist as a protected class, which is pretty disturbing. Chris Hedges has talked about this in a recent interview. I forget who I think it was Jimmy Dore. And it's really interesting. He said, major crackdown, and some of the students they rough up are Jewish students. They hate the fact that Jewish students are also protesting. It disturbs their narrative, their whole campaign. And it's particularly difficult for Jewish students at this time, not because of anti-Semitism, but because of crackdown against anti-Zionism. So it's interesting thing. So the UK has also, where is that here? The UK some prominent figures have been arrested or harassed by the state. Most very famous one is Richard Medhurst. Richard Medhurst is a YouTuber, independent journalist, independent media journalist. I don't know a huge amount about his background. I think he started his YouTube channel for around 2018 or so. He was using him, Pappy Truleman, just switch it to Richard Medhurst. He comes from an elite background. His parents are diplomats. His dad's English. His mom is Syrian. He was born in Damascus, and he spent his close family ties with Syria. Said his parents were part of a group that wanted to know about prize. Richard Medhurst himself said, "I'm a class traitor." He goes against his class. I said, "I'm a class traitor." That's why they hate me so much. He's not I wouldn't say he's a Marxist exactly. I think he regards himself as a Syrian Christian, often wears a cross, also a kafaya. He's very pro-Palestinian, very anti-imperialist. Really some good, very wealth of information about the Middle East, what's going on. Apparently, one time he was in a Linkin Park cover band, who I know about. He has a somewhat different persona now. He used to have these crab walk on his show, like a video of the crabs when to celebrate something, give him a donation or celebrate something. He doesn't like to do it because it's kind of tacky. But anyway, I enjoy watching his stuff. Gets very passionate, very emotional. So apparently he lives in Vienna. And his family's in the UK. He's very private. I don't know anything about his personal life. But he apparently came to the UK, Heathrow, to visit his parents, visit his family, I guess. And the police arrested him, kept him for 24 hours. They wouldn't let him contact anyone. Kept him for 24 hours. They wouldn't tell him what he was charged with. They were grilling him lots and lots of questions. He has to see his lawyer, and they said, we'll gave a couple of names to contact. And they wouldn't do it. Finally, he was extremely persistent. They finally did let him contact a lawyer. His lawyer, he got out. Was a pretty awful experience. They had kind of kept him in solitary. He was held under the Anti-Terrorism Act, I think it's Section 12, and I don't know what this means exactly. He was interviewed, Max Blumenthal interviewed him, and said, I'm not at liberty to really discuss my case. He's on like probate out on bail for like 3 months, and he could be facing technically 14 years in jail. Like, was he sympathized with Hamas? They could accuse him of sympathizing with Hamas or a proscribed organization. Could be facing 14 years in jail. I don't think they're going to do it. I don't think it's most likely eventually be dropped. These things usually drop, but it has a chilling effect, form of harassment. Also, a form of harassment. It's also, he says, a fishing expedition. They're trying to find out, see what they can find. It's like a fishing expedition. Part of it, they took his electronic equipment, which he's not going to get back. They have his passcodes and get into all his files, seeing what they could find. And so it's a form of harassment. Also, he's technically an unindicted co-conspirator. This is without being charged with anything. This could have a chilling effect as well. Max Blumenthal mentioned that, unindicted people are going to be afraid to work with him. Oh, you're unindicted co-conspirator. It's going to be his Wikipedia profile. That doesn't mean anything, but, so, anything, Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate interviewed him. Aaron Mate apparently is going to the UK, going to London for some event, to run something. He said, they said half jokingly to Richard Mears, if you could give me the name of your lawyers, I'm probably gonna need it when I go to London. And I think he's right. Interesting, under this anti-terrorism bill, I don't know if I mentioned this, but a 17-year-old kid was detained recently at a Free Palestine T-shirt, and they police detained him for a few hours. I mean, you got to be real if you don't wear a Palestine T-shirt or especially pro-Hamas or PFLP T-shirt, they'll stop. They could arrest you. And if you're especially a high-profile Palestine activist, solidarity activist, you could run into trouble going to the UK right now. They will harass you. They will detain you. They may arrest you. It's pretty disturbing. Another figure happened, I believe, a little bit later than this was August 29th, Sarah Wilkinson. She's the most famous, most prominent pro-Palestine activist in the UK. She's with an organization called Palestine Action. She's a journalist, essentially. Apparently, she has a lot of contacts in Gaza. They have the internet there. They do get some information out. They're able to get some stuff out. She's a lot of contact, and she repeat broadcasts what's happening. That's mostly a lot of what we know is happening in Gaza right now. Also, she's a journalist with something called MENA Uncensored, Middle East, North Africa Uncensored. Don't know a lot about them, but she's a journalist, frequent writer for them. And she's a very well-known figure in pro-Palestine movement in the UK. Well, in August 29th, I think her adult son was with her at the time. I forget his name. Her adult son was with her. And August 29th, 7:30 in the morning, he said between 12 and 16 cops were in baklavas, like hiding their face. You could see who they were. 12 and 16 cops went into her house. They desecrated her mother's ashes, which had on her fireplace or mantle ashes. They dumped it. They dumped her ashes on the table. They roughed her up a bit. They tied her hands behind her back. They arrested her, roughed her up a bit, took all her electronic equipment. She was detained, arrested. They didn't take her medicine. She's on various medications. They wouldn't let her take a personally life-threatening situation. Then she's out on bail for 3 months. The original condition was no contact with the internet, with online stuff whatsoever, including phone, internet, Twitter, anything. None. In fact, they said, you'll never be on the internet ever again. It was 3 months, but it was later relaxed because someone pointed out, what if she has a medical emergency? She have to use a cell phone to call the British equivalent of 911 or whatever to call for help, call an ambulance. So yeah, they relaxed it somewhat. She can use a phone now. She apparently recently moved to a small village, I think it says some relatively remote village, mainly to keep further away from the police and Zionist harassers. There's I forget where, the interview, Crispin Flintoff who's a British UK interviewer, YouTube channel, interesting channel, good channel. Crispin Flintoff interviewed her, really interesting. Now, again, she's also facing 14 years in prison. Most likely they'll eventually drop it, but there's an obvious campaign of harassment and intimidation they're showing. And, people pointed out these cops who came in, they could have been Mossad. She's seeing other people says the way they acted was like Mossad. There are close ties between British security state and Israel. They're very close ties. Very well. They did it. It was Mossad-like, Shin Bet or Mossad-like, very similar. Could have been almost a Mossad operation. Sure, they had her targeted. They had her targeted. Apparently, her Twitter account is still active. Her adult daughter runs her Twitter account. Another figure was arrested. Let's see if Richard Bernard, I got his name right. He was also founder of Palestinian Action. He was arrested back last year sometime under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act for basically speeches he made at rallies, which are seen as supporting Hamas. He was arrested for that. He was let go. Apparently, they're going to go to trial middle of this month. I don't know all the details. What happened? Also, Palestinian Action. They have not. She's not. These people, Sarah or Richard Bernard, were not involved in this, but they had 14 members of this Palestinian Action, civil disobedience. They occupied damaged equipment. Elbert, which is an Israeli military company which has factories in the UK and in the US as well. They disable equipment. I think it was great, but they were, of course, charged. The jury exonerated them, which is pretty wild. They found not guilty, and there were cases apparently in the UK where the judge could arrest the jury for not following directions, but the jury did not follow directions and they exonerated these people. They were let go, which is pretty widespread public sentiment against Israel. People horrified by the genocide. That was pretty interesting. Okay, so finally, the Berlin Palestine conference. There's supposed to be a big conference on Palestine, April 12th, like international congress there. They're going to release evidence of the horrors, what's going on exactly. And this was suppressed by the Berlin police, pretty brutally suppressed. They now rightly banned it, but there was an incident where several thousand people were going to come there. There was an incident where 1,000 people were outside the hall. Then the police only allowed 250 people in. There was one speaker, and then they cut off the electricity, basically ended the whole thing right just as it was starting. They banned it. Yanis Varoufakis, who's a finance minister under Syriza, he's a leftist activist. He was banned from coming to Germany. Big thing is a doctor, a Glasgow doctor, a Palestinian British doctor. His figure is Hassan Abu Sita. A plastic surgeon, and he's the rector or president of University of Glasgow. Very prominent figure. He was going to testify at this Congress. He was banned from coming to the UK, coming from Germany. Coming to Germany, a 1-year ban on this. And not only that, the German government threatened to prosecute him if he testified via Zoom, testified online. They threatened to prosecute. It was insane. So he couldn't come. So major crackdown of this, just really awful. They arrested some of the key organizers of this. The police shut it down. They arrested the key. They were beating people in the streets. It was chaos. They banned this thing. All these people were going to go to this conference, just beating people, just chaos. There was a figure, one of the organizers, a guy named Udi Ras, who's Jewish Israeli. He lives in Berlin. He worked as a tour guide, I guess, for the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And he gave he gave a private tour, and he mentioned the word apartheid. Israel is an apartheid state, which it obviously is. He was fired for saying this. He was one of the organizers. I believe he was arrested. Some of the top organizers were arrested or banned. I don't know what happened to them eventually. So pretty egregious. Germany, Germany's taken the wrong lessons from the Nazi Holocaust. Complete opposite. Complete wrong lessons should be never again for anybody. But they have this extreme, pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli mentality. Across the political spectrum in Germany, it's kind of odd from the left to the right. And also, I forgot to mention, articles in Mondo Weiss and The Intercept. I might provide a link. Over the summer, universities in the U.S. were strategizing how they can prevent another protest from, school was out for the summer. How they could prevent this. And it looks like they're banning encampments. There are all these plans to crack down. There's a beginning of another wave of protests. Colombia, there were protesters here and there. There are some protests erupting, but they're trying to. It's going to get very little publicity. They're trying to keep it low. They don't want anybody to know about it. They're cracking down. They really don't want these protests to erupting. So it's, and I think of Kamala Harris gets in, there'll be more attacks against freedom of speech. Not that Trump is that great either. Anyway, if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. I believe it's the 24th. I'm not online at home right now, so it'll be a couple days before I can upload this. Anyway, thanks and have a good day.